Stephanie from If I Had a Piano, filmmaker behind If I Had a Piano. Congratulations on your film. Thank you for attending. And if you could just tell us, or give us some background, please. Tell us about yourself, how you're involved in this.
Sure. So I wrote and directed If I Had a Piano, I'd Play You the Blues, which is a 6-minute art house piece in Portuguese. It's pretty much an homage to sensuality. It's a poem turned to images, and I'm very inspired by music, especially the blues. So there's like a bossa nova blues improv score in it as well.
Yeah.
And I've been writing and directing things my whole life, mostly theater growing up, and then by grad school I really got turned on to filmmaking, and the rest is history.
Because you come from, I know we've had a chat a couple of days ago, you're quite an artistic family, I think, aren't you?
We've got a lot of artists. My mom was a piano teacher and a church organist. My dad had played the clarinet in his college band. He was the drum major of his university's band, and he had dreams of being an actor too. And my sister's a classical pianist. I've got an opera singer. I've got a jazz trumpet player in the family. So we're definitely a very musical, especially, but a family who appreciates all of the arts.
And why? I know it's a crazy question, but why Portuguese?
It's for a couple reasons, but primarily the actor I cast is a native of Portugal, and I ended up casting his real-life wife, Anna, and she's not an actress, but the film is very intimate between the two characters, so I felt if we translate it to their native language, there'd be a more natural intimacy between the two of them, something that maybe the cameras could capture beyond my ability to direct them, and it works for me. It's also more sensual language in my mind, and it just kind of fits the esotericness of the piece. I think it works really nicely.
So can you speak Portuguese?
No, I know a couple phrases now because of the film that will probably serve me no use, but actually on my way over here I got to stop over in Lisbon, so that was a real treat for me, and I hope to go back and to learn Portuguese and to write more films for Portugal and Portuguese language.
So tell me, you've got the script, the film's, you're going to shoot in Portuguese, but how does it actually work when you're on set? I know you...
First of all, the dialogue in the film is the least important part of this film. It's not really a narrative film, and so the dialogue kind of sets the tone, and it's a little philosophical, in fact. So I had worked with Pedro, the main actor, in advance, and he helped me translate it, and we talked through what my meaning is, and he explained how the languages are different, and he made his best judgment as how to best translate it into Portuguese. And on set, I had the script that had Portuguese and English together, so I could read the Portuguese as they were saying, but I wasn't even looking at the script because I knew intimately the scenes. So really, as long as they were getting the basic points of it, it didn't matter if it was literal or not. I could feel whether the take was working for me or not based on... the bigger complication was most of the dialogue, all of the dialogue we shot takes place inside a car. And so for most of that, I was not inside the car with them either. So other than hearing over the headphones, I couldn't really... I kind of had to trust them and watch from outside the windshield as to what they were doing.
Right, okay, so you've got all that to do, but it's not, although the dialogue is important, it's not as important as it could be because of the way you structured the film.
Yeah.
Or structured the
It's
script.
more the sounds I was interested in this case. I'm a writer first, so it pains me to say the dialogue doesn't matter. It definitely matters, and in most of my scripts, the dialogue is very important. But this was a kind of experiment for me as a filmmaker, and I thought of this film more in colors and sounds and images, and so I was kind of, I'm a trained writer, but I was never a trained filmmaker. So the older I get and the more films I make, the more visually I think, which is really exciting for me because, initially it was all about the dialogue, but in this case, it was about everything, the subtext of the dialogue, and everything that was happening around it was more important in this case.
So what exactly were you trying? I suppose, what's the message of the film that you were really trying to get across?
There's no message. I wanted to capture a feeling, that feeling of desire in the moment of desire, and I wanted the audience to be in that moment with the characters, to kind of get hot and heavy over there's a lot of tension in the film between whether the characters will get together or not, and it's it's playing with that lust versus love, sensuality, sexuality, but it's really, I just wanted to create a mood of excitement of around desire and sensuality.
And what was the most positive thing that you can take away from making it? Or did it go as well? I suppose hand in hand with that did it go pretty much the way you wanted it to go as well?
It did. Actually, it went better. The challenge was my cinematographer and I sat down because initially the script was much more sexual rather than sensual, but the more we played with it before going to production, we decided it'd be a more interesting artistic challenge to show sexuality without showing any nudity or any sex or literal translation into that. And that to us was felt like it was going to be more challenging to pull off, because the characters almost never touch in the film. But I think we managed to capture that mood of sexuality. I've had programmers at other festivals actually call the film erotic. So to me, we did our job. We did the artistic challenge that we set out to do, because they even said they had to watch it a couple of times. Like they felt the film was so erotic and so sensual, and they watched it a couple more times to realize the characters almost never touched. So if I could capture that feeling in somebody, I feel like it was definitely the artistic challenge we set out to do, and I'm happy watching it, and that's really all that counts at the moment, I guess.
We've interviewed obviously a number of other filmmakers, and one thing that always fascinates me is that particularly this is really a two-hander, or is a two-hander. It's I guess when you're casting, obviously you need that chemistry.
Yeah.
And what do they bring to? When do you know that this is it? We've got it.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing, and usually I've had films where I've started out with 800 submissions for a part,
right.
And I've narrowed it down to maybe 100 that I end up seeing, and that's just looking at headshots and having gut instincts of who I want to bring in, or looking at demo reels, or looking at resumes. That's more gut. But then once I see them, it's I'll often cast one character before the other, so that I know I've cast the lead female, then I'll start auditioning her against the lead male. This process was different for If I Had a Piano, though, because I immediately knew I wanted Pedro to be in it.
Yeah.
I had worked with Pedro on a couple other short projects, and I just knew that this was much more abstract piece for me. It was much less narrative, so my process was different in creating it, and I knew I wouldn't have to break in the actor to my process, because I can be a little funky as a director, a little unconventional. But Pedro knew my process, and he also knew, my personal backstories, and he knew emotionally the mood I was going for, and I knew that he would get it. And so the challenge was, how do I find someone with the chemistry with Pedro?
Yeah.
And that's ultimately why I went to his wife, because I knew they have a really, really nice relationship, and they have a very private relationship. So I didn't know, it was a risk. I didn't know if it was going to be a smart choice or not, but in the end, I think it's the best choice I made in the film.
So before you got to that point, had you matched him up to other actresses, like this isn't working, this isn't working?
To be honest, I didn't this time, and it's so against my normal process, because I very much feel like casting is everything, and you want to see someone on camera first. And this was a really quick project from conception to actual filming, and I don't know why I made the choice. It was a very instinctive choice, and it could have gone the other way, and I would have been kicking myself now for not putting multiple people in front of a camera with him as I normally do. But I was going for something on a deeper level of intimacy than two strangers who both happen to be actors and happen to have good chemistry. Because even if they had good chemistry on screen, which would have been essential, it still may not have tapped into that deeper level of privacy that I was like this, intimacy between a couple who have gone through a lot together and still love each other as much as the day they first met. And to be honest, filming this reinstored my faith in love. I used to be a hopeless romantic, and I became jaded over
like
the
we
years.
all do, yeah.
But working with them was truly remarkable because they have a type of love and intimacy for one another that I hadn't seen in a long time, and I thought that was really nice.
Oh, that's lovely. And what about the? How do you go about the process of the location? How does that work? Did you immediately have somewhere in mind?
So in this case, yes, because I initially wrote it for New York City, but for several reasons I decided to shoot half of it in Jackson Heights, as opposed. I kind of had a Lower East Side vibe in mind, but the logistics of getting permits and doing that
hassle
would have been difficult.
Yeah.
So I was living in Jackson Heights, Queens at the time, and I just kind of started scouting locations in my neighborhood. I just wanted something that was gritty and industrial, and it was because most of the city scenes take place, all the city scenes take place inside a car, except for one bonus shot we ended up doing in a kind of dark tunnel. But the other half of the film all takes place in what I call an alternate universe. I hesitate to call it a fantasy because I want it to be just as real as the reality.
Right.
But I shoot that in Pennsylvania, in the area where I'm from, and I ended up writing it to the location.
Right. So that the location you're talking about, Pennsylvania, you'd already chosen that before you'd even started shooting a frame of film.
Yes, I did. Part of that was by this point I had been making films actively for 5 years, and I had never made a film in my hometown, other than a family documentary I was toying around with. But I just thought I have such a beautiful home, just where I grew up, and I actually spent my entire childhood there. I never left home until I was 18, and it's a beautiful wooded area. And my parents, over the years when I was living elsewhere, they started buying more property on the same location. So
so around your homestead?
Now they own part of the woods and a very nice pond there, and they actually own another house that's within the property. So I just thought it would be foolish not to use these really aesthetically rich locations that I had at my disposal. It definitely cut down costs, which as a producer you have to think about, but aesthetically and artistically it served our needs perfectly.
Because it must be difficult when you're balancing the artistic side of it, because let's be honest, all filmmakers want to do is create something.
Yeah.
But balancing that against cost, and I don't know if to say this compromise. I don't know if you compromise. Oh, that kind of is a compromise, I guess. You'd already chosen that.
I think for this case, it wasn't a compromise. It was the right artistic move that also happened to save us money. In another example, my previous film before this, And If I Stay, it's a 15-minute drama. The initial title for the film was Paris in Winter because the film was set in Paris, but most of the film takes place in a single hotel room.
I was going to say, because that sounds expensive.
Yeah, so, and the interesting thing was I kind of wanted to be like the antithesis of a Paris romance. So I wanted to show the darker side of Paris as opposed to the American ideal of springtime in Paris. So I didn't even want iconic shots of the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, but I still wanted it to look like Paris, at the least a European city. And the compromise I ended up having to make was to shoot it in Montreal. So I actually took my cast, it was another two-hander, so I took the cast and a couple crew members, but we hired most of the crew in Montreal. And we just rode the Amtrak train up from New York, which was a 10-hour trip, but it was beautiful.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It allowed for the actors to bond, which was nice. And I just rented a hotel suite, and we filmed everything in that hotel suite, and then we did the exteriors in the old French Quarter.
Yeah, which looks French, obviously.
It looks French, and frankly, the name Paris never comes up in the script anyway. The one character is Irish, the other character is American. So we decided it was better if it was just an ambiguous European city as opposed to Paris, which is why we changed the name from Paris in Winter to And If I Stay.
Yeah. And I mean, so when you were doing this, if I had a penny, so I know it's New York and then over to Pennsylvania. So how did you split that time? Because I'm guessing it's weeks apart. I don't know. And how difficult is that?
I did this one differently too because I had the idea and just immediately called up my director of photography and said, we got to shoot this. This is an idea I can't let go of. It was kind of an obsession. I decided to split the filmmaking process into 3 stages. So the first stage was just a one-day overnight shoot in New York. So half the film, all the car scenes we shot in one 10 to 12 hour period in the middle of the night in Queens. And what I had done was I had raised enough money to do that one day.
And how do you do the because I know it's a difficult thing, and I try to avoid anything to do with the finance. But how did you? I mean,
well, it's an important aspect of filmmaking.
No, I know, but
what I did with this one is I typically have events. So since I've been producing stuff since I was about 15, I've over the years have built up a small donor base, and because I'd been living in New York, I built a film community there as well. So I'd have small parties at bars and things like that, where they'd be like small fundraisers to kind of just get excitement. I'd show teasers, or I'd show previous work, or I'd bring the actors, bring live music, often raffles or auctions, and just to get starter seed funds, because I had raised the money to make And If I Stay prior to If I Had a Piano, and If I Stay, for all its faults, at least looks good, and I think the actors are great in it. I could use that to show new potential donors what I can do. And so for If I Had a Piano, to start it off, I basically wrote a pitch packet. I basically drew up a couple pages, put some stills in it, put information about the influences, previous work, previous accolades, and went to individual people who I thought would be interested in helping. And I was fortunate enough that they wanted to help, and I got enough to do the first day of shooting.
And how many days were there eventually?
There were only a total of 3 actually by the end, which was really, cutting it close. But so then a month later, I maybe cut something from that first day, and then did a little more fundraising efforts, and then I record the music actually before we finished shooting, because the music was a very important aspect to me in this film. And so I hired a jazz trio, and we got a place for an hour and just did an hour of improv music, which is way more than you would need for a 6-minute film.
Because I didn't ask you, I assume you can play if you come from a musical background.
I can play. I would not play professionally, but my passion was always composing music and jazz, but I'm classically trained, so even though I want to have jazz chops, I can play, basic Debussy or Chopin or Beethoven. I used to be able to play.
I'm going to get you to do Arabesque No. 1 in about 10 seconds, so don't worry.
5 years ago, I probably could have pulled it off, but not anymore. My dream was always to play the drums, actually. You'll see drumsticks in my film, and that's partly because I always just wanted to be a drummer. I find it a very sexy, sensual instrument. And I did take a year of drum lessons in New York, so that fulfilled some childhood fantasy. But yeah, so we recorded the music. I had an hour's worth of improv, and there was one track that I loved, and I used that as a basis of editing the film later. And then a month after that, I think I did another fundraiser before we headed to Pennsylvania. And then I just took my crew to Pennsylvania for a long weekend, and we had a really nice, it was a small crew.
Oh, this is getting back to what I was saying, how you
Yeah.
shuttered that and moved it on.
So I actually split it up with If I Stay, because I was taking the whole crew to Montreal. I wanted that to be like a studio system where I was paying them, I was giving them daily meal stipends, I arranged for their transportation, hotel stay, so they could be more focused working with me for that 4-day, 5-day period we shot in If I Stay in Montreal, which as a first, that was really my first professional type of film shoot. It wasn't enough time for me. I was still learning as a director, but it was nice to have everybody in one place at my disposal, with them not being distracted about having to go to work later or their boyfriend, girlfriend problems.
Yeah.
It was all contained, and that was really nice. But for this, it worked out equally well, splitting it into 3 chunks, because it gave me time to raise, it wasn't as daunting to raise X amount of money when I could do it in those little chunks. And then the most successful fundraiser was afterwards. I had a post-production fundraiser where I could release a trailer and, show stills and get, I had it in Pennsylvania. And so my small town was really excited about, a film shoot happening in their town. So that was a really successful fundraiser, and that allowed us to pay the sound designer and color
really? So you had a nice
correction and
turnout
things like
for that,
yeah. So that worked really well for me. I might use that model again in the future. I'm not sure yet. But
Okay.
I think for narrative stuff, I think I prefer the first model of having everybody contained to one space and one time period. And hopefully I'm a little more confident to direct story to script than I was a few years ago in Montreal. But yeah, this worked for If I Had a Piano.
Brilliant. And finally, favourite film? No, sorry, not favourite film. That's not the question I'm going to ask, because that's a trap.
Yeah.
Which film influenced you the most?
For If I Had a Piano, 3 films influenced us. Wonka Wise and The Mood for Love was a huge influence. You can see we use the slow-mo shots in similar ways. And the way Wonka Wai uses music in that film was very influential. I wouldn't say I did it even remotely the same, but just the mood he created to me definitely influenced If I Had a Piano. The film Blow Up, actually.
Blow Up?
Yeah, 1966.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Antonioni.
Yeah.
That influenced us. You don't see much of that influence in the film, but there is 1 or 2 specific shots that we labeled the blow up shot, because that mood from early scenes in Blow Up with the photographer and the model, that sexual tension we really liked, and how he angles his frames.
I think it's David Hemmings is the actor in it, I think.
Yes, it's David Hemmings. And then the Godard film, Vive sa vie.
Haven't seen it.
That was a third influence, but whether I'm making a film or not, I'm constantly watching films from past and present to keep studying and to keep absorbing cinema, because definitely seeing other films influences my work. Music, fine arts, people I meet, locations I visit, and other films are what really influence what goes into the work.
Brilliant, thank you.
Vemos tudo. A nossa lente imaginária. No silêncio. És verdade.